Chapter 108 to 111. When the knight saw me stalking down the hallway, he struggled in the grasp of his captors. The two men in Targaryen livery kept good hold of him though, and eventually Ser Roga strode past me and kicked him in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air. I heard Ser Stefan snort in derision and the guards hauled him back up onto his knees none too gently. What happened? I managed through clenched teeth. The man whimpered at the ice-cold tone of my voice. "Why, your grace," he said, trying to bow only for one of the men flanking him wrench him back up. "Your grace. Please." I swear I guarded the room. I did not leave my post nor did I sleep, I swear on the lives of my children. After Joffrey had informed me, I'd been frozen in an odd combination of fear and rage for long enough that Rhaenys and Corlys picked up on something being wrong. Once I'd explained it to them, they had moved into action. Corlys had headed towards the docks to quietly raise as many of his and Laenor's crew as possible for a search of the town and docks. He was 73 now and much the same as he had always been, although with considerably more wrinkles and laugh lines and less muscle. Time had also forced him to start dressing warmly, lest he catch his death, because he wanted to show his chest off to everyone. Rhaenys had gone with Joffrey to organize the children and begin a search of the castle. Time had been very, very kind to the queen who never was. She was still as tall as she had ever been with the same striking features, although her hair was beginning to turn silver at the temples now, not a surprise given that she was 52. The blade she had taken during the conquest still troubled her on occasion, which limited her flying at times, but apart from that she was as hale and healthy as her husband. The knight's throat bobbed in terror as I met his eyes and stared him down. "Ser Roga," I barked. The man straightened. A fuck-up on his men's part reflected badly on him. A fuck-up of this magnitude. I had already decided that if Alyssa was hurt, he would be stripped of his title. "How many children does he have?" Ser Roga's eyebrows rose in surprise before they furrowed in thought. "3, your grace. 2 sons and a daughter," he finally replied. "They live in town. And you would swear on all their lives that you did not fail in your duty?" He was shaking now, but I wasn't inclined to mercy. "If my daughter was hurt." There was a moment's silence before the threat sank in. "Why yes, yes. I would swear." I cut him off. Has this man ever fallen asleep at his post before? Ser Roga was quick to reply. "No, your grace, I make sure none of my men ever do. I run random checks, if they are ever caught, they are stripped of their position." The man was nodding along desperately, tears now running down his face. I studied him and made up my mind. "I leave him to you to deal with then, Ser Roga. I am satisfied he was not derelict in his duties." The trembling man sighed in relief as he was released by the other guards. Ser Roga half bowed in response and I detected some relief in his frame too. "Thank you, your grace," said Ser Roga. "Shall I have my men join the search?" "Do so, but as quietly as possible for the moment," I told him and he bowed again. "I shall release your squire to you once I have finished questioning him." He moved off, his men dragging the guard with them, and I stepped into her room. It was the same as it had been yesterday. The blankets and covers on her bed had been thrown aside to reveal 2 pillows stacked against each other, presumably to provide the illusion of the bed still having an occupant. "They were fooled by this?" I asked. "It would appear so," said Ser Stefan, examining the room. "Perhaps the maids should be spoken to." "They will be," I promised. Still, no struggle, and she deliberately tried to hide her absence. "She left by her own will," concluded Ser Stefan for me, lifting open one of her trunks and finding only dolls and dresses. He let it slam close with a loud snap and stepped past me, sticking his head out the window and peering down. "Probably through here." "Who is in the room below?" "No one, to my knowledge." "It should be empty, why?" I asked as he pulled his head back inside. "The window below is open." A quick trip down there told us that the dust had been disturbed recently by at least 2 people. One of which arrived via the window and was pulled in by her larger compatriot. Damn her. So, she had help, did she? "Not Eamon, Emma, Rena, Ali or Jane, they're all too small to have made these footprints," I mused, as Ser Stefan finished examining the room. It had yielded nothing but a half-melted candle and more footprints. Aleandra, Lucerys or Adam then? Aleandra was my first stop. My ward was agitated beyond belief when I arrived, pacing back and forth whilst curling her hair around her finger. She sat when she saw us, perching on the edge of one of her couches. Did you find her? She asked, dark eyes wide in fear. Fear of what? I was not sure. Me, punishment and Alice being injured were all possibilities. She did not look tired. Had she stayed up all night to help Alice escape, then she would almost certainly be struggling to keep her eyes open. We did not. It seems she left her room via the window so as to not alert the guard. Given she is 3 stories up, this implies she had help, I told her, and she froze, dark hair curled around her fingers. I swear to you on all the gods I did not help her. I did not know, the girl begged, and I found myself believing her. The two were good friends, which would make her prime suspect, but that also counted against her. Aleandra was not an idiot. If Alice had confided in her a plan to run away, Aleandra would have come straight to me. She knew well that Alice was fragile and sickly, any terrible fate could befall her without protection. She mentioned nothing to you? She has not been behaving strangely? Aleandra paused at that and then opened her mouth before hesitating and closing it. What? Well, before we left King's Landing, she asked me to cover for her one afternoon. She had some papers with her and she said she had to deliver them to a friend, but she wouldn't tell me whom, she said, squirming in her seat. But it was at least a week before we were due to sail, and she never mentioned it again. I sat back and closed my eyes. If that matter was related to this, and there was no guarantee it was, it could be any of the staff that we had brought over with us. That significantly widened the suspect pool, although papers? I would have expected money, actually. I would have expected whichever fool she had picked to help her to report it to me or someone in charge so that I could have dealt with this before my daughter went missing. I swear, Renera - I opened my eyes and forced a smile. I believe you, Aleandra. You would not be so stupid, but I had to ask. She nodded, still looking worried. Collect the others and enjoy a trip into town with Sarah and Sabita. Her worry gave way to relief and I smiled at her. Thank you, she said, rising out of her seat. I rose also. You should not be punished for someone else's actions, but if you do hear anything or see her I will tell you. Or well, Lady Sarah or Lady Sabita. I nodded and left for Luceri's room. When I got there he was sitting with Joffrey and Rena, the two siblings curled close to their father. Luke looked more like Daemon every day, although that had long since ceased to bother me. He was boisterous, loud and impulsive, but he was also unfailingly kind. His silver gold hair was cut short, I think because he was mimicking Laenor, although at 11 he was nowhere close to a beard. Rena was Lena in miniature, although her hair was Joffrey's dark brown. Small for her age, much like Alice was, and if I were to be completely honest, as Lena and Joffrey were supposedly being about Alice, spoilt beyond measure. Apparently she and Emma were best friends, although I could not imagine my quiet little girl getting along with such a terror. I thought it best to wait for your appearance before I took them to see Lena, said Joffrey. Luke looked worried, but not the fear I would expect from him if he thought he was close to being caught as Alice's mysterious helper. Rena just glared at me, no doubt she resented being held back from seeing her mother after Lena had been gone for so long. I have just a few questions, I said gently. Joffrey tapped both his children on the shoulders and they reluctantly sat up to face me properly. Alice had helped to leave her room. Did she mention this plan to you? No, said Luke, frowning. She was just being her usual self. And that means? I asked gently. He looked at his father, even more worried, but it was Rena that answered me. She curled her knees close to her chest and glared at me as she did so. She was being mean. She was teasing Luke and Jocelyn about having small dragons and Emma and me about not having any, she burst out. Joffrey froze, eyes wide. Alice doesn't have a dragon, I pointed out dryly. And will not be getting one until she is 2 and 10 at least. Don't be foolish, Renera, Joffrey burst out. You are cleverer than this. I swallowed my rage. Screaming at him would not be conducive to finding my daughter. Not to mention the bad example it would set, I had no doubt the children would be eager to spread tales of my anger about the group. Instead, I took a deep breath and fixed him with a look. What do you I stopped as what he was getting at hit me like a brick to the face. No, she would not be so foolish. Would she not? Asked Joffrey. I stood up and clenched my hands tightly, ignoring the pain that brought. Do you dare say it to my face now? Or will you rely on Lena to do it once more? My voice was cold. Joffrey watched me for a good long while before sending Luke and Rena from the room. When he turned back, there was fury etched in his face too. We both know she can manipulate you with ease. She is spoiled. She has a nasty streak. How many times has she escaped punishment with faked illness even Emma can see through, he asked, and that fact was like a punch to the chest, driving the breath from my lungs. You favor her so obviously that even your other children feel they cannot complain. It was hard to tell when Joffrey was lying, downplaying events or omitting the truth, but it was always easy to tell when he was telling the truth and nothing but the truth. His features had morphed into triumph. Damn him. Damn Lena. I would know. I did not have time to formulate a response, because somewhere a bell began to ring. We both froze, previous anger forgotten, as we remembered what that bell signified today of all days. Two curious heads poked around the doorway Joffrey had sent them through, and then the room exploded into action. I was first out, but Joffrey was not far behind, surprisingly speedy despite his cane. Ser Stefan was behind, herding the two children ahead of him, his armor clanking as we made our way downstairs and through corridors. The entirety of Dragonstone seemed to be rushing towards the agreed location. Of course the others were there before us, they had been waiting with bated breath for his return. Which one is it? I asked a guard who was peering through a far eye, already knowing the answer in my heart. Vermithor, replied the guard, tone grim. He's got the Bronze Fury. It seemed the entire courtyard was holding its collective breath as the vast bulk of Vermithor, second only to Vagor in size, cast us all into shadow as it came in for a landing. I forced myself to tear my gaze from the dragon to examine the crowd. Aegon's grin was wide, Daeron and Visera were curled close to Alicent. Alicent looked as if all her dreams were coming true. A son of hers riding the dragon of the old king. Actually, it probably was a dream come true. Even father looked proud, his chest puffed out and a smile so wide I feared he'd strain something. Then Vermithor landed, its rider sliding off its back with an audible thud and a stagger, and all the smiles died. The silence of the crowd was deafening as Alice regarded us all before seemingly falling backwards onto the mass of her dragon. That got me moving, shoving some of Aemon's river knights aside to reach her. Joffrey was in pursuit behind me, but it was father that beat me to her, his face a mask of worry. She smiled at him weakly as he pulled her into a hug, her tiny arms only just able to wrap completely around his bulk. Whispering broke out across the courtyard, interspersed with some cheers. Mostly though, people were confused. Grandpapa, she mumbled, clearly tired. Look, I have a dragon now. Indeed you do, he laughed, putting her down gently. Then he turned to me with tears in his eyes. She's just like her namesake. Who else but my mother would have done such a thing? Except my daughter, of course. Her grin only widened, then she seemed to notice my shock and horror and it dimmed considerably. I could barely summon words, my daughter, a dragon that size. The reality of just how much danger she had been in hit me, and I took a deep breath, willing myself to be steady. Are you angry with me, Mama? I'm sorry. I just wanted a dragon like Jocelyn. I stared at her, her little chest rising and falling with the exhaustion of trekking up a mountain and taming a dragon. Then I stared at Vermithor, the second largest dragon in existence, and Jaehaerys mount. As quickly as my horror had come, relief flooded through me and I rushed forward to pull her close, laughing with the force of it. She sank into the embrace happily, her little hands tangling in my dress. I lifted her up and twirled her around, my earlier anger at her disappearance gone in the face of the sheer knowledge she was here and okay. Angry? No, as long as you're okay, I told her breathlessly as I set her down. She leaned against me, and I could feel how warm she was through her thin clothes. Worry crept its way back in as Laenor crashed to a halt next to us and set about his fussing. I wanted to laugh again, to pull her close and never let her go. I caught sight of Alicent and was pulled back into the present unpleasantly. She would need to be watched. She looked as if she might throw up or decide to attack my daughter where she stood. She wasn't even bothering to hide the fury that sent her face pale and her youngest children fleeing to their older brother in fear. Even Aegon looked discomfited when he met my eyes. He had helped Aemond research Vermithor and dragon lore for years, he would have something to say about Alice beating him to the punch. Still no sign of Helena, damn, this would not look good to any of them. I looked at the great dragon my daughter had claimed and swallowed back my no doubt hysterical giggles. Who could have thought? Who? I had been resigned to the fact that Aemond would claim Jaehaerys dragon, and my daughter had instead. Rhaenyra, whispered Joffrey. If Alyssa just climbed a mountain whilst ill and wearing a tunic that thin, we should probably get her seen by Gerardis. He had a point and she had felt warm to the touch when I held her and she had been ill the night before. Laenor. I called. We are taking her to Gerardis. Come on, little one, he whispered to her. Let's get you seen to before your mother worries herself half to death. It felt like the eyes of the world were on me as we left. My legs felt like jelly as I wobbled my way to the old maester's tower. It was all I could do not to stop every few moments to reassure myself that she was really there. Should I be thankful that I had only realized how easily she could have died after it was apparent she was alive and well? I did not know whether to laugh or cry, and that same indecision was still gripping me by the time we found Gerardis, Lena and Jocelyn. Alice was laid down on a bed and Gerardis was soon examining her with a concerned look on his face. I seated myself next to Lena and Jocelyn and gazed at my daughter. She claimed vermouth. I heard Joffrey whisper to his wife, yet I could not summon my usual ire over the matter. I could not even summon it when I felt Lena's glare on the back of my head. "Ill, was she?" she asked, finally. I heard Joffrey sigh, and in the corner of my eye, Laenor's gaze swung to his sister. "Yet well enough to climb the Dragonmont?" "She has paid for it," I pointed out, feeling the need to defend that at least. "She's running a fever. And that is punishment for disobeying your orders and taming vermouth?" Her tone was tart and I swallowed. It was not punishment, but... I turned to them, dragging my eyes from Alice. Jocelyn watched me with wide, violet eyes. Confused, she turned to Lena for clarification. As if she did not believe Alice could have truly tamed vermouth, and I was surely somehow mistaken. I remembered Joffrey's revelation from before her landing with a guilty start. But you banned everyone from taming a dragon from the Dragonmont before they were 6 and 10 like Grandpapa did with Uncle Emond, she said in a small confused voice. Why did you let Alice go up? I stared at her, mouth hanging open, and Laenor answered for me. Alice did not ask for permission, he said gently. She will be punished for that, do not worry. Your mother is waiting until she is well enough to appreciate what she did wrong. Joffrey caught my eye and nodded to the corner, incurring a suspicious look from Laenor. I laid my hand on his knee and got up. You need to punish her, Joffrey said quietly. Even if you don't yet realize what she has done is wrong, you need to. I could feel Jocelyn's gaze on me, despite Laenor and Lena doing their best to try and distract her from the matter. Did he assume? I am well aware of that, I breathed, wondering why my knees still felt like jelly and my heart still raced. He tilted his head as if puzzled at my response. She went up the Dragonmont. Yet she had only done what I myself had done, and she was older now than I had been then. Could I truly punish her for following my bad example? My gaze went to her as Gerardis listened to her chest. She looked so small. No, I had to. If I didn't, Eamon would be next and Emma as well. Jocelyn scowled at her bed sheet and I bit my lip. She had disobeyed me, planned this little trip before we'd even sailed for Dragonstone. How did I miss it? I groaned as the implications of that unpleasant thought made themselves clear. She is as clever as her mother, he said dryly. And twice as spoiled. You say she is spoiled, I said. Maybe she is. Maybe I should be angry, and maybe I should yell and rage at her. I would not ask you to. I know well how traumatizing a screaming match with you is, he said, and I recognized his tone with a flash of annoyance, the tone he took when he was playing the gracious victor. I am not saying you need to be angry, just apply consequences. This is an escalation. I took a few more deep breaths. Yet how? Do I ground her? Ban her from the library? Have her struck? No, the punishment must be related to the crime. Of that, I was certain. When Jocelyn grew angry and struck other children, she was banned from the training yard. When Emma stayed up past her bedtime to read, her book was taken away. Yet what punishment fits the crime of taming a dragon? We made our way back over to Jocelyn and I dropped a kiss on her forehead, being sure to avoid her stitches and the truly impressive bruising that had formed around them. An idea formed in my mind as Lena took Joffrey's hand as he settled beside her. An idea that could kill 3 birds with 1 stone if I were lucky. Your sister has done something terribly bad by sneaking out in the dead of night, I told Jocelyn, and her eyes lit up. Did I truly fail to acknowledge Alice's wrongdoing to that degree? So she will not get to choose whom she takes her writing lessons with. Black eyebrows furrowed together in confusion. But, my little warrior, you do. I know Grandmama Rainey's wanted to teach you, as did Auntie Lena and Papa, but I also want to teach you. I promise that if you choose me, I will never be too busy for you. Lena glanced at Joffrey, confused, but Joffrey hadn't yet seen my plot either. Jocelyn pushed herself into a sitting position and gazed at me. You would teach me to fly Morrigan? She asked in that same small voice. I smiled, hoping it wasn't too pained, and caught her hand. If you want me to, I would be honored. One arm wrapped around my neck as she flung herself forward to cuddle into me. I heard Laner chuckle delightedly at the scene. She drew back, looking excited. When can we start? Mama, can we start soon? Morgan is here on the island, so we could start tomorrow. I pointed to her arm and she glanced down before frowning unhappily. My arm doesn't hurt. Please, Mama? We shall read dragon lore together, I told her. In the comfort of my offices until your arm is better. Then I will teach you how to ride. She would have to be happy with that. I had first-hand knowledge of what could happen if a break went bad. She seemed to be on the same track because her eyes traveled down to the prosthetic hidden by my glove. Then she scrunched her face up and nodded seriously. Laner covered his mouth with his hand to hide his amused grin. But Mama, shall we be able to start tomorrow? I turned to find Alice. She gave me a grin and clambered into Laner's lap. I smiled in relief, before remembering my resolve to punish her, regardless of whose example she had followed and how much it had benefited me. You may if your tutor allows you, I told her, and she frowned. But I want you to teach me, Mama? You're teaching Jocelyn. I winced at the tiny voice she said it in. She was so frail, for a moment I nearly wavered until Joffrey cleared his throat and I remembered myself. She'd tamed Vermithor, I told myself. It had been dangerous and ill thought out. Emond would be after her and the Greens would consider her greater target than usual. She had tricked me, lied to me. When I thought of it that way, anger stirred in my gut. You disobeyed me. You went up the Dragonmont. You lied to me, she sniffled, rubbing at her eyes. But Mama, I didn't want Emond to get the dragon. He's nasty and he didn't deserve it, she explained, fighting tears. And you did the same thing when you were younger. I just wanted to be like you. I forced my face to remain in its stern expression even as my heart hurt with the knowledge. And I tricked him. He helped me take Vermithor right from beneath his nose. I stared at her and even Joffrey let out an impressed whistle. She added in a begrudging tone. Well, Aunt Helena helped too, but she only helped a little bit. She didn't know either. How did you trick them? Asked Laner, seeming genuinely curious. I filed away that information about Helena's involvement for later. Remember when the cannibal went into his home? And the Watchers sent you a letter about him moving? I gave that letter to Emond and I told him that if he helped me claim Silverwing I'd tell him where Vermithor moved to. Okay, maybe my daughter was slightly more devious than I had thought. Very funny, said Lena dryly. But have you thought about the consequences? I got the dragon first. He can't have it now, Alice said, her silver gold eyebrows coming together in an angry V. Mama, tell her. He cannot take it from you, I replied. But he will be angry. His friends will be angry. Do you not understand? What you did was wrong, finished Lena. No matter the result. I got Vermithor though. So will you teach me? With Jocelyn? She asked as I recovered. No. You have to be punished, said Jocelyn, looking at me as if she expected me to give in. Alice blinked and her bottom lip quivered. I sighed. Jocelyn is right, Alice. So as punishment, you don't get to decide who teaches you. I do. She glared at her sister as Jocelyn glared right back before turning to me sullenly. All right, so who is teaching me? I caught Laner's eye and tried to communicate that he needed to keep a good hold of her as I sensed she definitely would not like my decision. You needn't sound so upset, Alice. Your Aunt Lena is the best rider of our generation. It took about 3 seconds for that to sink in. Then Joffrey's eyebrows practically disappeared into his hair, Laner grinned widely and Lena and Alice exploded into furious denial and screaming. Mama! Please, begged Alice, squirming on Laner's lap. There were tears in her eyes, I noted with a wince. Mama, please, Auntie Lena doesn't like me. She'll be mean. Please don't make her be my teacher. She is not making me do anything. I refuse, said Lena icily. Joffrey placed his hand over hers and she paused in her tirade, glancing back at him, confused. He leaned in to whisper something in her ear but I was distracted by Jocelyn. Why does she get to be taught by Aunt Lena? That's not a punishment, she asked, angry tears in the corners of her eyes. And what should her punishment be, little one? I asked Jocelyn gently. My firstborn furiously rubbed at her eyes before turning to Lena in appeal. Lena for her part appeared to be lost in thought about whatever Joffrey had just told her. Finding no help there, Jocelyn pouted and sank into the bed. When I reached for her hand, she pulled it away and fixed me with such a glare my heart hurt. Yet before I could deal with that, Alice gave a furious screech and struggled in Laenor's arms, clawing at his bare arms, leaving angry red marks behind. "Very well," said Lena. Alice froze, staring at her aunt with a shocked expression. One that mirrored Jocelyn's perfectly. "I'll teach Alice." My sigh of relief came too soon though, because Lena was not done. I perhaps should have consulted her before bringing it up, but I had always been of the opinion punishment should be swift, not some drawn-out mess. On 2 conditions, she elaborated. 1, that I have total control over her lessons, and 2, I decide if her skipping them was acceptable and her punishment if it is not. "No," screeched Alice, suddenly desperate. "No. Mama, she will punish me for everything. She will be mean. Mama, please." I met Lena's eyes. Was that true? I did not think so, if I were forced to think objectively. Lena took writing and teaching as seriously as Rhaenys did. She would not risk compromising Alice's lessons for petty reasons even if I had no doubt she would be strict with her. And after this? Yes, strict was what Alice needed. Some part of that numb shock became determination. "I agree to those terms," I said. She sighed in relief, and I did not miss Jocelyn's smile brightening up her face once more as she no doubt imagined Lena given free rein with Alice. "Mama," whined Alice, staring at me. "Mama, please, I only wanted to be like you." "And your mother was punished also," said Laenor. "She was banned from all her friends and the library for nearly a month." True, but how had Laenor known that? He had been on Driftmark, his parents still sulking because of Rhaenys being passed over twice. I am sure I never told him of such in our letters either. Alice's eyes narrowed at the revelation though, and Jocelyn's smirk became wider, bordering on a shark-like grin. Then Alice slumped against Laenor and closed her eyes. "May I go to sleep now, Papa?" she asked, sadly. He gave me a pained look before scooping her up and carrying her over to the bay Girardis had made up for her. As he drew the thick velvet curtains around it, I heard her ask if he would tell her a story, and I was forced to clench my teeth until they ached. I always told Alice and Jocelyn their bedtime stories. "Mama? When I go to sleep later, I still want you to tell me my bedtime story," whispered Jocelyn, and I glanced down in surprise. She smiled at me, and I found my hand pushing the hair back from her face, grief and love welling up within me in equal measure. The bell began ringing as a tear trickled down my face. I froze, remembering what that meant before pushing myself up. "Laenor, stay here. Ser Stefan, you as well. Aemond is not to enter this ward unless he's on a stretcher." My white knight hesitated for a moment but fell back, taking up a vigil at the end of Jocelyn's bed. It was Lena that followed me, limping slightly on her injured leg now, no doubt due to Gertie's finally giving it a look over. The race to the courtyard felt even longer than the last one had. This time, I was one of the first there. Alicent had beaten me, of course, but then I wasn't sure if that should count because I wasn't sure if she had actually left after I had taken Alice away. A few other knights who had been close by. I squinted into the sky, making out the vague shape of a dragon. Which one had he tamed? My question was answered the moment I had thought of it. "Silverwing," called the guard with far eye, and I forced myself not to laugh at the sense of victory that brought. Silverwing was still a dangerous dragon in her own right, I reminded myself, but oh, to lose Vermithor and be forced to settle with the dragon associated with the good queen. I forced myself to look solemn and concerned. It would not be well received if I made my amusement too obvious. I frowned as I remembered Alice's earlier words. If she had told the truth, Aemond had helped her leave the castle, he'd helped her put herself in danger. Silverwing was navigated down fairly deftly by Aemond. He'd clearly taken those dragon manuals to heart. If he ever managed to find himself a teacher, he'd be a fearsome writer indeed, I had no doubt about that. I watched as he slipped off Silverwing's back and stalked forward. The crowd itself was back to that confused muttering that rose like a hiss. They knew that something had gone wrong for Aemond today, they just weren't sure what. Viserys pulled his son into a tight hug. Aemond's arms hung by his sides for a moment too long and then rose slowly, returning the embrace. My son, I am proud of you." "Silverwing," said Viserys, releasing Aemond, seemingly oblivious to the fury that was pouring off of his son. After a moment of silence, Aemond forced a smile. "Thank you, father," he managed, through gritted teeth. Aegon swept forward then, seizing his brother about the shoulders. He made it look like a joyous motion, but I detected the true purpose. He was putting himself between Emond and the crowd. He must have said something to father too. Come. There will be a feast tonight and I wish to prepare for it, he called to the crowd, after giving his oldest son a somewhat puzzled look. The crowd took quite some time to disperse. I considered leaving with them but decided against it when Emond scanned the crowd and his eyes met mine. I saw the hate and anger spark in his eyes. Better to head this off now than have him do something foolish to Alice. I would kill him if he did anything to her. I hoped my eyes conveyed that as I returned his gaze. I picked my way through those leaving, ignoring the curious glances I was getting from onlookers. Emond watched, looking as if it were only Aegon's hand on his shoulder holding him back. Congratulations, Prince Emond. Silverwing is a fine mount, said Lena, once we were within spitting distance. Don't act like my friend, witch, snarled Emond. And you? See what happens when I get my hands on that little traitor. Emond, said Aegon sharply. You are angry, but this is not the way to behave. At his brother's admonishment, Emond's eyes dropped to his boots. Yet his shoulders were still tense and his hands still clenched tight. His chest fell and rose as if he had spent the day running with the force of his anger. Aegon watched him with a stern expression before turning to me. This was ill done, sister. He looked too much like father when he was like that. I am so glad he chose not to copy the mustache in this timeline. You know how long Emond has sought Vermithor. Do you honestly think that I sent my daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, up the damn mountain with no escort when she was ill to beat Emond to a dragon? I asked, making sure he understood I was disgusted with the accusation. Perhaps you should ask Emond who did send her up the dragon motte? At the mention of his name, Emond's head jerked up. Aegon's stern gaze flickered and became one of confusion as Emond did not move to deny my accusation. Eames? What did you do? Asked Aegon, aghast. Emond's face screwed up in anger before he turned to his brother. She had detailed reports on all the dragons on the Dragonmont, did you know that, brother? She kept them from us. From me. That little shit agreed to give me Vermithors if I helped her tame Silverwing. Even being caught in the wrong by his precious older brother was doing little to cool Emond's anger. Aegon just sighed, bringing his hand up to his face. She is being punished for what she has done, I told them. But Emond went behind my back, he put my daughter in danger. He is sorry for that, said Aegon in a tone that implied that if Emond were not already, he would be when he was done with the chewing out he was about to get. Emond, go to my quarters and wait there. Emond trudged off, foot bouncing off of the doors that led inside. We watched him go in silence. May I speak to you, sister? Asked Aegon, before his gaze flicked to Lena. Alone? Of course. Lena? She hesitated and I raised an eyebrow. Aleandra was hoping for some instruction tomorrow, I believe. You need to gather your strength for that. Very well, she sighed before bowing mockingly. As my princess demands. The moment she was out of sight, my brother and I began a slow, meandering walk through Dragonstone. It gave me time to reflect on the man he was now. Nearly 20, he was every maiden's dream and a far cry from the man of Cannon, with his silver gold hair cut short and no facial hair to speak of. A tall, trim knight with a reputation for honor. He was more than good with the blade and lance as well, he had a lot of tourney wins to his name. The perfect prince. That was by design, I suspected. I had long ago realized he wanted the throne. He may love me as his sister, but that did not mean he was willing to stand aside and let me take what he perceived as rightfully his. Yet he was not a threat to me yet, he was still building his legend. It was a cruel thing Alyssa did, said Aegon. And it is a cruel thing for you to take joy in it. I will not pretend to be unhappy that my daughter tamed Vermithor. It keeps him from you, after all, I told him, and he straightened up considerably. He may be just shorter than Laenor, but he towered over me. But if you believe I take joy in it, you are very wrong, Aegon. You still believe there will be rebellion? No one will rise against you, sister. He sounded frustrated. Yet you have visions of a crown dancing behind your eyes. I will not give it up, and neither will you. It was an old argument, as old as his return from the Westerlands. He had returned with the idea that Viserys should hold another great council, arguing that he should use it to gain the Lord's approval of his choice of heir as Jaehaerys had once done for him. Father had told him no, of course. There would be no great council whilst he lived, as he had decreed me his heir and his word was the law. How dare Aegon imply that a monarch's power was not absolute? My dear brother had run into the usual green flaw. If a king could not overrule a previous ruler's laws, or indeed overrule his lords, then how could he maintain the illusion he was the ultimate power in the realm? Must we have this argument once more? I merely propose a great council after father's death, he said. To prevent any conflict between our lines. A great council where my votes would be split between me and my son. A great council where I would be at a disadvantage from the beginning. A great council you believe you will win, else you would not propose it, I pointed out, trying to hide the frustration I felt. He sighed, clearly aggravated over the matter. I did not come here to argue about the council. A wrong was done to Eamon today. When I looked unconvinced, he added, and to Helena, too. She worked hard, helping Eamon study. You owe her an explanation, Rhaenyra. I owe her nothing, for it was not me that engaged in a harebrained scheme to send a 10-year-old after a dragon. I shouted, remembering Alice's words. He stopped, staring at me before he sighed deeply. Helena too? Well, at least speak to her. She is quite upset by the whole matter, he told me. And if you do, please try to be rational about it. I will not allow you to yell at her. Sometimes I wonder if Canon Aegon would have been better, was my thought as he strode off, determined not to give me the final say. Entering my old labs filled me with longing for simpler times, when it seemed I was only one step away from an easy answer to all of my problems. They were much different these days. Their current occupant had certainly changed them to reflect her own research and style. One part of the wall had been filled with old and dusty tomes likely filched from the Alchemist's Guild and perhaps, if I knew Lena, even further afield. The great table that had once dominated the center of the room was gone, leaving a vast amount of floor space, and as a result a great deal of the floor now bore signs of scorch marks and miscellaneous stains. Which is not to say she'd rid herself of all my furniture. A great oaken bench was still there from the days I had wasted away my time in here. The cabinet above it too, although I had filled it with chemicals which I very much doubted was what Lena used it for. Oh, you're here early? Said Lena, entering behind me and definitely not frightening the life from me. I thought it prudent, you said you had something of great importance to discuss. She picked her way past me carefully, carrying a wooden box in her arms. I winced as she let it collide with her workbench with a loud bang. You've even beaten Joffrey though. That counts as early, she teased, fumbling at the box's clasps. Trying not to look as if I were watching her every move in a manner that implied I was judging her, I made my way over to the window and peered out of it. Dawn had only just broken and the castle and town beneath it were beginning to stir to life. I have other things to attend to this morning, I told her. As do I, Alice, for one. The box was open to reveal 3 dragon eggs resting in straw. I stared as she hummed in satisfaction before closing it once more and placing the box beneath the workbench. I wasn't sure which bait she wanted me to take, but I was sure both were bait given the raised eyebrow she was now directing my way. And Aleandra, I replied. She smiled at that. A short session, I think. Travel took a lot out of me. It was not travel that had taken so much from her, but I wasn't going to have that conversation now. It was different this time, she had come back better and mostly whole. This was not the Lena that I had found here all those years ago, yet I could still see that miserable figure hunched in a corner, defiant as she always was but broken in a way even she could not deny. Still, perhaps she was not entirely wrong with her assessment, this journey had taken something from her. Who has roused your anger today? Why do you assume I'm angry? I asked and she chuckled, turning to face me and leaning on the workbench with crossed arms. You've been glaring out that window for a while now, she said, smiling. I can only hope it is not me. It is not. I am thankful, you know, that you have agreed to train Alice, I told her. I should have asked you before announcing it. Yet you are the logical choice. You fly the only dragon larger than hers. Am I now? She chuckled. Alice would not agree. It has become apparent to me that Alice needs your skepticism, I sighed. So thank you. You may not be so thankful when you start fielding her complaints. You believe I will find her a perfectly nice girl and I believe I shall finally introduce her to consequences for her actions. Time will tell who is right. I frowned at the unusual bluntness of her manner but was prevented from pursuing the matter further by Joffrey and Laenor arriving together. Laenor was already kitted out for his daily training, I noted with amusement. Do you not believe in chairs, Lena? Complained Laenor. She didn't answer him, instead standing aside so that Joffrey could lean against the work table. You will be fine, Laenor, I said and he sighed but didn't push the point. Then I directed my attention to Lena once more. Well, what is this information? Whilst traveling the demon road I began hearing rumors, she began. Merchants traveling west began speaking of, well, of dragons. Dragons? Plural? I asked and she nodded, face grim. Damon? That was what I thought. Yet your sister's warning rang in my ears, dash. You still have not told us the contents of the warning, said Joffrey, cutting her off. Only that it concerned what would happen should you travel to Gagassos. Lena took a deep breath and then let it out slowly. And I will not tell you. It was meant for me alone, she stated firmly. I went as far east as I dared. And what did you discover? Asked Laenor, his face grim. Joffrey took his hand, running his thumb over his palm, and Laenor spared him a small smile in turn. Daemon was in Karth, and he has another dragon rider with him. The statement was like a punch to the gut. Another dragon rider? How? Whilst I could not set aside the possibility he had managed to lay his hands on a dragon seed, where would he get a second dragon? I did not explore further. Only long enough to confirm the matter. So he has reappeared with another dragon at his side. An alarming development to be sure, but right now, Daemon is a world away. Joffrey began, but I cut him off. He will not stay a world away. He will come back here, and he will be looking to make us suffer. Laenor stood a little straighter at that, while Lena merely squirmed, clearly uncomfortable. I will send spies to him, vowed Joffrey. I will ensure we know what he is doing, and when he is doing it before he does. Silence reigned a little after that. We were all tense. Daemon's return would be fun for none of us, and we had children to think about now. I would die, I would kill, before I let him lay his hands on my children. Yet it was not only me in danger when my uncle returned to Westeros. Warn Lady Rhea if you would. I fear he may strike at her, I said, and Joffrey nodded, a frown on his face. We will be ready for him, said Laenor. We will be ready for him, and he will pay for what he has done. The grim look on his face was enough to let me know he meant every word. A far cry from the man I had married, but a change for the better, no one could deny that. Then as soon as the fierceness had come, it was gone again, and he gave me a small smile. A knock on the door was enough to put an end to any more discussion about Daemon for now, although I knew it would be a topic we were likely to revisit many times in the future. When Laenor opened the door, one of the maids stepped in and bowed low. Your Grace, you asked to be notified when Princess Helena left to attend morning practice? She asked, and I did not miss the way her eyes flickered curiously about Lena's workspace. We'd both decided letting the servants in here was too dangerous physically and socially. This was likely the first time she'd seen it since its transformation into Lena's lair. No doubt it would be a blood-soaked torture room in the stories spread by evening. Thank you, I shall endeavor to meet her there, I told the maid, and she bowed once more, scrambling off with wide eyes. You are angry at Helena? Asked Lena, sounding confused. What has Helena done? She allowed my daughter to put herself in incredible danger, was the simple answer. I had thrown the accusation at Aegon yesterday as a way of going on the offensive, forcing him to defend Helena and Aemon to me, but the more I actually thought on the matter the angrier it made me. It is what she didn't do that has made me angry, I replied, wondering how on earth I could explain it to her. Helena and Aemon had gone behind my back and helped my 10-year-old daughter run off up a mountain and confront a dragon. They both knew, beyond all doubt, that had I known of their plan I would have put a stop to it in an instant. Yet they had both done so regardless. Perhaps it was easier to swallow that behavior from Aemon. He was still, in many ways, the angry young boy that had been sent to Riverrun, even if he had learnt the Tully words and the lessons they imparted well. We were not close, the rift that had opened up between us when he had been a child had never truly healed, yet he acknowledged me as family, and I knew he was, or had been before the business with Alice, more fond of his nieces and nephews than he liked to claim. I had been told of 3 occasions in which he'd challenged some luckless idiot to a duel for spreading unfortunate rumors about my children. But Helena should have known better. Helena should have been better. The very fact that Alice had blindsided her by taking Vermithor meant she had not been operating on some kind of vision. Even if she had, that was still hovering on the barely acceptable side of the scale. She had been the first of my siblings to hold Alice, she had been one of the first people Alice had ever smiled at, to think that she might have gotten her killed. Yes, I had made myself very angry thinking about this. Ah, said Lena. Alice. I paused by the door at the tone and gave her a raised eyebrow. She rolled her eyes in response. Before you leave, it was my hope to speak to you about certain matters. Puzzled, I stepped back into the room. Is it about Alice? If it is, I will stay, said Laner, his eyes flickering back and forth between us. Lena looked as if she wanted to squirm. I don't think it is, I replied when she didn't answer straight away. Go train. Could you? Laner paused at his sister's voice. Could you tell Aleandra I may be a little late? Of course, he said, his gaze finally softening from suspicion a little. She was silent for some time after we were left alone. Am I forgiven? She asked, voice small. The question took me by surprise, and she blushed, eyes finding her shoes. You were quite clear on what would happen if I were late this time. Idiot, I said, wanting to laugh and cry at the same time. Have you truly been worrying over that? She half shrugged, scuffing her shoes over a particularly odd-looking purple stain before looking up again. I was startled to find tears in her eyes. I made a mess of things, she said, finally. And you forgave more than I thought you ever would. I do not want to test that forgiveness again. Idiot, I said again, moving forward to embrace her. She sighed as she laid her cheek on my head, and if she was shaking, I wasn't about to point it out. I love you. I forgave you the moment you got back. She chuckled, and I knew she was crying in earnest now. I pushed myself closer into her, hoping I wasn't hurting her chest. If I am harsh, it's because I fear for you, I whispered. It's because I do not know what I would do without you. She drew back to look at me properly, a few tears running down her face. You do not know how much that means to me and how much I love you in turn, she replied, raising a hand to my cheek. I smiled at her and leaned into it, savoring the warm touch. After a moment, she seemed to shake herself out of whatever thoughts she had been lost in. Go find your sister and take her to task. I shall clean up here and hope Aleandra hasn't exploded with impatience. I laughed and dropped a kiss to the palm of her hand. Of course, I replied. Do not be too long though, else Laner will have her half convinced she should be using a sword again. I left her giggling helplessly. The training yard was not busy this early. I spotted many miscellaneous knights, Saroga instructing Adam with Laner watching, Aegon dueling a knight in Westerling colors, and, of course, the woman I had come here to see. Helena was 17 now, and as different from her canon counterpart as Aegon was from his. Tall for a woman and well known for her skill with the bow, whether the target was a deer or more dangerous prey. Her silver gold hair was styled in a braid similar to mine, and despite my anger, it did cause me to smile slightly. She'd always be my little sister, even when she was pulling shit like this. You're better today? I asked, causing her to curse as one of her arrows missed its mark. She turned to me with wary eyes, and my hands found my hips almost without conscious thought. I do believe we are due a talk. She winced, and it was enough to tell me that Aegon had likely warned her I was aware of her involvement. I remained silent as she placed her bow down slowly, as if she had just been invited to take a walk to the headsman's block and was determined to delay it for as long as possible. I am sorry, she said when we finally found a corner with some privacy. I was not unaware of Aegon's eyes on us from across the yard, though. It was reckless of me. What possessed you to think it a good idea? I asked with heat in my tone. She was staring at her boots, and that annoyed me enough that I had to put effort into controlling my temper. To go behind my back and send her up the Dragonmont alone at 10? Alice is very persuasive, she begged me. I thought of Emond and how it was not fair he had to wait, her shoulders slumped and she raised her head to look me in the eye. I was wrong. I am sorry. Sorry. I cried and Helena flinched. Sorry is when you accidentally break a vase. Sorry is for when you spill wine on a rug. Sorry is for when you borrow jewelry and forget to return it on time. Sorry is not for when you send my child up the side of a mountain. From the corner of my eye I saw Aegon move to stalk towards us only to have Laner drop a hand on his shoulder. I thought, Did you? Did you really think? She was sick. I cried. She shifted from foot to foot. No amount of persuasion should be enough to send Alice to tame a dragon. You should have come straight to me the moment she brought the matter up. She is 10, she has no sense. You could have killed her. I knew nothing bad would happen. I stared at the sudden anger. I am not so foolish as to hurt her on purpose or through recklessness. I love Alice, Rhaenyra. I merely thought I could bring Emond closer to your children. The regret seemed genuine at least. Or maybe it was because their idiocy had lost Emond the dragon he truly wanted. I did not know for certain, but at least she had not chosen to complain about that. I watched as she brought a hand up to her face to rub at her eyes. If I knew her, and I did, she was likely castigating herself for the matter worse than I could. Anything could have happened, I said, lowering my voice. As it happens, she is well if bemoaning her punishment, but if you ever, pull something like this again. I left the threat hanging as she nodded so hard I feared she may pull a muscle. Did it change your visions or something? You didn't leave your room yesterday? I asked, trying to inject some gentleness into my tone. She blinked in surprise and then rubbed at her forehead with one hand, grimacing. No, not my visions, she finally said. I understood why she had reacted so. She hated to even acknowledge them. Those months after she had warned Lena of whatever future she had seen had been some of the worst of my life. My sister in a near coma-like state, her very sanity at risk? I did not know what would have happened had the worst come to pass. If Helena had sacrificed herself for Lena. What is it then? I can have Gerardis attend to you if you do not wish to speak to me, I told her, and she sighed before meeting my gaze. It's not you. It really isn't, it's just a big thing. Her hand curled at her stomach, protectively. I stared at her as the meaning of her words hit me. Oh, I said. You're pregnant. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kayashin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons. Ben Phillips. If you liked the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll stay here until next time.